In this Corecon training video segment, we're going to explore a feature in Corecon's contract administration for prime contract invoices, specifically those associated with a fixed lump sum prime contract. If we go to Help in Corecon, and then under the Corecon browser solution, select Leads and Projects and Contract Administration, and then under Prime Contract, there's an article called Prime Contract Budgets Overview, which has a section that includes a brief description of the 4 contract types. The one we're dealing with in this training video is the fixed lump sum contract type and how to create new prime invoices for this contract type. A fixed lump sum contract is probably the most commonly used in the construction industry. And the way the contracts are wrote, there's certain scope of work that can be performed for a fixed amount. Regardless of whether the work takes more or less time, the lump sum is still paid, unless there are changes to the scope of work, which is processed as a change order. The fixed lump sum amount is broken down into a list of items referred to as a schedule of values, or SOV. We're going to cover prime invoices created under the other 3 prime contract types in separate videos. Back to Corecon. The features that we're covering today are under the Projects menu with a project selected, and under the Client Contract Admin module. As you can see from this project that the job cost codes are already assigned, the prime contract is already entered with an approved status and approved status date. This also has 2 prime change orders, and we're going to create our first prime invoice. Before we begin, there's a few reminders. First of all, as already discussed, a prime invoice process changes based on the contract type. This training video is dealing only with prime invoices as they relate to fixed lump sum prime contracts. Only a prime invoice with a approved contract status and a status date will appear on project financials. A prime invoice marked approved with a status date is also eligible to be exported through Corecon Link utility to accounting software. A prime invoice for fixed lump sum has separate billing columns for default work and stored materials. A prime invoice is usually created with a draft status until it has been reviewed by the owner, customer, or client. To create our first prime invoice, we go down to the Prime Invoices line under the Stats section and over to Actions. We're going to use the Add Manual method. Most of the information is already filled in because the project has been set up. The prime contract is marked approved. The client, customer, project owner, and contact will also fill in from the prime contract. Your company and your company contact will appear. This prime contract also has an architect, engineer, or construction management firm already tagged, so that information will appear here as well. It's important to note there's a difference between the order number and the invoice number. The invoice number usually is numbered sequentially and could correspond to other formats. The order number, however, determines the previous invoice amounts. Corecon will set the next value when creating the invoice. There's a help article that illustrates the difference between an order number and an invoice number. In this case, there's 4 prime invoices, numbered individually and sequentially. The order number, though, is what Corecon uses to calculate the previous invoiced amounts. If you were creating the prime invoice number 4 with a sequential order number 4, Corecon knows to look to all of the order numbers below that to calculate the previous billed to date. The amounts added on prime invoice number 4 would show in the current column. So we're going to leave the order number populate automatically. If we needed to reformat the invoice number, that can be done here as well. We're going to give it an issue date. We'll allow the terms to default, but they can be changed. The payment due date also defaults based on the terms. And while usually you would create a new prime invoice in draft or pending status, we're going to mark this one approved because we want to create a second one in a few minutes. Retainage or holdback can also be calculated. This defaulted from the prime contract. Then click Save and Next. We're going to use option A for this example. Option A allows you to create a prime invoice based on line item details and includes separate line items for change orders. Option B allows you to create a prime invoice based on job cost codes, and while job cost codes can be used for either the original contract amount or the change orders, these will be billed at the same time combined and if duplicated. The invoice retainage only method, option C, is covered in a separate training video. We're using option A. Click Next. The items that appear on the next screen are from the original contract items only. There are no change orders on this page. You'll notice there's a current work column, a current stored column, and previous invoices to date. That sequential order number that we spoke about will determine what appears in the previous invoices to date. There are 3 ways to add the amounts to the current work total. You can select multiple line items down the left-hand side, use global changes, and assign the percentage complete and mass. You can also add the dollar amounts to the current work total column, and they calculate for you automatically, as well as a percentage complete. The third option to create these line items is to use the percentage and allow the current work total amount to be calculated. And we'll just put in a few percentages here so we have something to look at in a few minutes. Then we'll click Add and Next. The next step shows the approved prime change orders with a status date that fall within the range of this prime invoice. Notice that they appear on this step because the change orders are marked approved and they are unbilled. If you wanted to see line items from previously billed change orders, there's an option here at the top right-hand corner. Notice that the amounts you're invoicing can be added the same way as on the original contract items. You can select multiple line items, use global changes to set percentages. You can add the dollar amounts to the current work total column, or you can add percentages, and all 3 will calculate. We're going to use the percentage method, and in doing so, the current work total column calculated. Notice that the previous invoices are 0 because the order number of the first prime invoice is number 1. So nothing would appear in the previous invoices column. Then we click Add and Close. That brings us back to the prime contract invoice information page for this particular invoice. If you need to make edits to the information you've entered under the invoice details, click on the View Invoice Details. You can make changes. Back to the prime invoice info page. You can do the same thing with change orders. Again, billing out the retainage or holdback is handled in a different Corecon training video. To see what we just did, go to Reports at the top, click on Prime Invoice Details. We're going to use the default template, and I'm going to print to PDF so we can preview. The first page is a simile of a G702 form. It's an application and certificate for payment. It has a summary of the contract and approved change orders and a revised contract value, the amount billed on this invoice less retainage, and the amount that's going to be currently receivable. The second page is a simile of a G703 form, sometimes called a continuation sheet. In this case, it's showing only the items from the original contract values. Third page is a list of the change orders billed on this invoice. If we go back to the select template, also point out that there's quite a few different formats to print. And if you go down to the export option, these can be saved as PDF to the linked files, and they can be emailed from this point as well. If we go back out to the prime contract invoice information page and go to reports, there's also a way to print lien waivers. Now, because we have this invoice already marked approved, when we go to create the second prime invoice, if we go to Actions and Add Manually, Again, most of the information fills in. Notice that the order number now has changed to a number 2 sequentially. The invoice number was populated, and we'll use a different date, mark it approved, and click Save and Next. Again, using option A, clicking Next, original contract values that were not previously billed 100% will appear. If you see some that are not appearing, it's probably because they were billed 100% on a previous invoice. Those can be shown again by selecting the issue credit for previous invoice items. Notice that the previous percentages and dollar amounts would appear under previous invoices and previous percentage complete. You cannot enter an amount greater than 100%, but if this is your second invoice and you're changing the amounts billed on a particular line item, you will need to enter an amount greater than the previous. Notice that the current work total filled in for us, and the previous invoices also appear in the column just to the left. Then we'll click Add and Next. The same is true for change orders. Anything that wasn't billed on a previous invoice can be added here, and click Add and Next. We go to Reports, to Prime Invoice Details. We use the same default template and print a PDF so we can preview. Notice that the application and certificate for payment now have been updated and show the previous amounts requested for payment. The new totals at the bottom are the current amount due on this Prime invoice. The second page, notice that there is a previous billings. That's from the first Prime invoice we created. The current billings would be from this Prime invoice, and total billed to date would be a combination of previous and current. The third page is just the change orders, but the same principles apply. These can also be emailed from the export option, and if you go back to reports, you'll also have the ability to print lien waivers. If you'd like to know more about this information, we encourage you to go to the help articles, to Corecon, to leads and projects, to contract admin, to prime contract invoice, and review the information found in this help article as well as the associated help articles that are referenced by links.